My mother-in-law stood at the podium of her own charity gala in front of 200 of the most important people in Charleston, South Carolina, and told them all that I was nobody. She had a microphone, a spotlight, and 6 years of rehearsal. What she didn't know, what nobody in that room knew except me, was that the building she was standing in only existed because of a decision I had made 18 months earlier. And the evening she had planned so carefully was about to end in a way that no amount of old money could undo. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. Not the gala, not the confrontation, but a Tuesday afternoon in November 6 years ago, when I drove up to the Caldwell house for the first time and understood, in the space of about 30 seconds, exactly what I was walking into. My name is Elena. I'm 34 years old. I'm an architect. I design buildings, hospitals, libraries, community centers, structures meant to last longer than the people who argue about them. I grew up in Beaufort County in a house with a roof that leaked over the kitchen and a father who fixed other people's boilers for a living. My mother worked the early shift at a textile plant until the plant closed, and then she worked the early shift at a grocery store. We were not poor in the way that becomes a story people admire. We were poor in the quiet way, the way where you just don't have things and you learn not to mention it. I got a full ship to Clemson. I graduated second in my class. I worked for a firm in Atlanta for 4 years before starting my own. By the time I met Daniel Caldwell at a mutual friend's dinner party, I had designed 11 buildings and was carrying the weight of a 12th. Daniel was warm, funny, and completely unprepared for his mother. That first drive to the Caldwell house, I remember the gates. Actual iron gates, with a stone pillar on either side. Daniel punched a code into a keypad. I watched the gates swing open slowly, and I thought, someone paid a lot of money to make sure strangers felt that gap. Margaret Caldwell was standing on the front steps when we pulled up. She was wearing pearls at 11 in the morning. She was 61 years old and looked 50, the specific kind of 50 that requires 3 appointments a week and never admitting to any of them. She hugged Daniel first, long, eyes closed, both hands on his back. Then she turned to me. Her smile arrived about half a second after it should have. "Welcome," she said. "Daniel has told me so much about you." She had not looked me in the eye once. Inside, the house was everything you'd expect and a few things you wouldn't. Museum quiet, fresh flowers on every flat surface. A portrait of Margaret's late husband, Robert Caldwell Sr., hung in the entry hall the way some families hang crucifixes. Central, unavoidable, a reminder of who this house had been built around. We had lunch in the formal dining room. Margaret had prepared it herself, she said, though I later learned the housekeeper had done everything except place the garnish. She asked about my firm with the tone of someone inquiring about a hobby. "That little architecture business of yours, how many employees?" "Just 2 at the time. I had 1 associate and a part-time drafter." I told her this honestly. She nodded the way people nod when they're moving past something that didn't interest them. "And your family is from Beaufort," she said. Not a question. A placement. Like she was pinning a label to something she needed to file correctly. "Your father? What does he do?" "He's retired," I said. "He was a building maintenance engineer." She repeated the phrase back to me without the last word. Building maintenance. A small pause. "Well, that's honest work." Honest work. 2 words that contained an entire verdict. Daniel proposed 8 months later, on a Tuesday. He was allergic to romance on any day that felt performative, which was one of the things I loved about him. We were sitting on the floor of my home office eating takeout pad thai while I showed him the blueprints for a pediatric clinic in North Charleston. He pulled the ring out of his jacket pocket like he'd been carrying it around and finally found the right moment. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We told Margaret the following Sunday. She hugged Daniel. She turned to me. She said, "Well, isn't that something?" And then she asked if we'd thought about a prenuptial agreement. Not asking Daniel, asking me, as if I were the one who needed to be cautioned. Daniel said, "Mom?" She said, "It's just practical, sweetheart. Alina, I'm sure you understand. Families like ours have to be careful." Families like ours. I looked at her. I kept my voice the way I keep my buildings, steady, with good bones. "I understand completely," I said. We signed a prenup 3 months later. I signed it without blinking. I had built everything I owned with my own hands. I wasn't afraid of a document. But I remembered the phrase, families like ours. Before I go on, if you've ever been made to feel like a guest in your own life, like you have to prove yourself to people who made up their minds before you walked in the door, leave a word in the comments. Just one word. I'll read every single one. Now let me tell you about the 6 years between that Sunday and the gala. Margaret was never loud about it. That's what made it so effective. She didn't shout. She didn't make scenes. She had a vocabulary of small, precise instruments, the hesitation before my name, the compliment that arrived with a qualifier attached, the story told in my presence about someone else who had married well and what that meant for their children. At the first Caldwell family Christmas, she introduced me to her sister as Daniel's wife. No name, no profession. Her sister asked what I did. Before I could answer, Margaret said, "Alina keeps very busy." The sister nodded and moved on. She did it at Easter. She did it at Robert Sr.'s memorial dinner. She did it so consistently and quietly that I began to wonder if I was inventing it, the way you sometimes check a photograph 3 times because you're not sure if you're really in it. Daniel noticed some of it. Not all. He was the kind of man who believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt until the evidence was overwhelming, and Margaret was careful with the evidence. I said something once, about a year in. We were driving home from Thanksgiving, and I told him, as calmly as I could, that his mother had referred to my firm as my little project twice at the dinner table. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She doesn't mean anything by it, Elle. She's just old-fashioned." I looked out the window. The highway lights were blurring past. Old-fashioned, I thought, as if cruelty, when it comes with good posture, is just a stylistic choice. I let it go. I had a building to finish. The Caldwell Charitable Foundation had been Margaret's primary occupation since her husband died 9 years ago. It funded arts programs in underfunded schools, literacy initiatives, after-school centers across the Low Country. The work itself was genuinely good. I had no argument with the work. But the foundation also served another function, one that became clearer to me the longer I watched Margaret operate. It was the infrastructure of her identity. The events, the galas, the named endowments, they were how Margaret Caldwell told the world who she was. Take away the foundation, and you took away her language. Every November, she held the Caldwell Gala. Black tie, 200 guests, a keynote speaker, a live auction. It raised between $300,000 and $400,000 a year for the programs. It was her masterpiece, and she knew it. And she needed everyone in the room to know it too. 6 years in, she invited me to be on the planning committee. Daniel thought it was a gesture of inclusion. I recognized it as something else entirely, an audition conducted in public with no choice but to participate. I said yes. I sat on the committee. I contributed ideas. Several of them were used without attribution. But it was through the committee that I learned something that changed everything. Her name was Priya Anand. She was the foundation's external auditor, brought in every 2 years by the board as standard practice. She was methodical, quiet, and had the kind of eyes that moved across a spreadsheet the way a doctor's hands move across a patient, looking for things that shouldn't be there. We met at a planning meeting in March, 8 months before the gala. She was there to ask the committee about projected costs for the event. Afterward, we ended up standing near the coffee station at the same time. She said, "You're Elena Marsh. Your firm designed the Thornton Library in Somerville." I said, "Yes." She said, "I drove 20 minutes out of my way to see that building last year. The way you handled the transition from the old wing to the new one, it was the most thoughtful piece of civic architecture I've seen in this state in a decade." I stared at her. Nobody had ever said that to me in this building. We exchanged cards. 3 weeks later, she called me. Her voice was different than at the meeting. Careful, precise, lower. She said she needed to ask me something in confidence, and that before she asked, I should know she was asking because she trusted my integrity, not to put me in a difficult position. I said, "Ask." She said, "Have you seen the foundation's grant disbursement records for the past 3 years?" I had not, but I was on the planning committee. I had access. She said, "Look at the line items for the community enrichment subcategory, specifically the entries labeled administrative facilitation fees. Then call me back." I looked that same night. Daniel was at a work dinner. I sat at my desk with the foundation's shared drive open on my laptop, and I went through 3 years of disbursement records line by line. The administrative facilitation fees were real entries. They were documented. They were, on the surface, unremarkable. Between $60,000 and $90,000 per year paid to a consultancy called Meridian Strategic Partners for program coordination services. I searched for Meridian Strategic Partners. It had a website, sparse, professional, no individual names listed, a registered LLC in Delaware, no social media presence, no news coverage, no record of any public-facing work. I sat back in my chair. I'm an architect. I build things on paper before they exist in the world. I know what a real structure looks like, and I know what a facade looks like. Meridian Strategic Partners was a facade. I called Priya the next morning. She said, "I found it 8 months ago. I've been trying to determine the ownership of the LLC without access to state-level filings. I'm not authorized to request directly. I've flagged it internally to the board's chair, but the chair is a close personal friend of Mrs. Caldwell's. My escalation went nowhere." I said, "What do you need from me?" She said, "I need someone willing to file a formal complaint with the South Carolina Secretary of State's office. As an interested party, someone with documented access to the records. That triggers an independent investigation without going through the board." I was quiet for a long moment. I thought about Daniel. I thought about what this would do. Then I thought about the schools. The children in those after-school centers, the ones the grant money was supposed to reach. I said, "Send me the form." I want to stop here for a second because I know what some of you are thinking. Did I file that complaint to hurt Margaret? I need you to know. No, not then. I filed it because the money belonged to children and it was going somewhere else. I filed it because Priya had been doing the right thing for 8 months in a room where nobody was listening, and she deserved a door that opened. If I'm honest, and I'm trying to be honest about all of it, I didn't know when or how the investigation would conclude. I didn't know if it would reach any public result at all. I filed the paperwork in March. I set it down. I went back to work. I had a building to finish. 4 months before the gala, my firm was shortlisted to submit a design proposal for the new Henderson Community Center in North Charleston. Public commission, city funded, the largest project I'd been considered for. My associate James and I worked on the proposal for 6 weeks straight. I barely slept. I ate at my desk. I revised the structural drawings 11 times. We won the commission in July. I did not tell Margaret, not out of strategy, out of self-preservation. I had learned over 6 years that good things, when presented to Margaret Caldwell, had a way of being quietly resized. I wanted to hold this one intact a little longer. Daniel knew. He was the first person I called, standing in the parking lot outside my office at 6:47 in the evening, crying in a way I hadn't since my father was sick. He drove over and brought Thai food, and we sat on the floor of my office. The same floor, the same posture as the night he proposed. And he held my hands and said, "I am so proud of you." No qualifier, no hesitation. He was better than I've made him sound in parts of this story. I want to say that clearly. October, 3 weeks before the gala. The planning committee met for a final review. Margaret was at the head of the table in a cream blazer, reading glasses low on her nose, going through the program line by line. She stopped at the keynote section. "We'll need to confirm the honoree introduction language," she said. She looked across the table at the committee's program director, a woman named Sandra. Sandra, who is presenting the Civic Award this year? Sandra looked down at her folder. Mayor Tillman will present. The recipient this year is, she turned a page, Elena Marsh of Marsh Architecture, for the Henderson Community Center Commission and her firm's decision to donate 15% of the design fee back to the city's Public Works Fund. The table went quiet. I had not told the committee this was happening. I had not told anyone except Daniel. Mayor Tillman's office had coordinated directly with the gala's Civic Award Committee, a subcommittee that Margaret had not personally chaired. I looked at Margaret. She had gone very still in the way that expensive things go still when they're about to break. She looked at Sandra, then at me. Her reading glasses were still low on her nose. "Is that right?" she said. "Elena." Not a question. My name in her mouth, like something she needed to verify, was real. I held her gaze. "Yes," I said. She set down her pen, picked up her water glass, drank, set it back down. "Well," she said finally, "what a surprise." The meeting continued. She said almost nothing for the rest of it. 2 days before the gala, Meredith, Daniel's younger sister, the only member of the Caldwell family who had been consistently uncomplicated kind to me, called me while I was ironing my dress. She said, "Alina, I need to tell you something. Mom had dinner with Aunt Patricia last night, and I was there, and she spent most of it talking about you." I stopped ironing. "What did she say?" Meredith took a breath. "She said she'd done some research into your family, your background. She said she found something, and she was planning to share it at the gala. In front of people. She thinks." She paused. "She thinks if people understand where you came from, they'll understand that the award is," her word was, "premature." I sat down on the edge of the bed. "Something about your father," Meredith continued, her voice small and miserable. "I don't know what exactly. She wouldn't say all of it. But Elena, she had notes. She was reading from actual notes." I thanked Meredith. I told her she had done the right thing calling me. I told her not to worry. I hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while. Then I picked up the iron and finished my dress. "I need to ask you something. If you've ever stood in a room where someone had decided, before you opened your mouth, before you proved a single thing, that you didn't belong there, drop a number in the comments. How many times has it happened to you? I see every comment. I want to know I'm not alone in this." Now let me tell you about the night of the gala. The Henderson Community Center had been under construction for 3 months. It wouldn't open for another 14. But on the night of the Caldwell Gala, the building that hosted 200 guests, the Hargrove Pavilion, a restored event space in downtown Charleston that the foundation had used for 11 consecutive years, was a building I knew in a specific way. I had done pro bono structural consultation on its renovation 2 years earlier. A favor for the City Preservation Office, unpaid, because the building was a 1920s freight warehouse, and I loved it, and I didn't want to watch it be ruined by people who thought renovation meant concealing rather than revealing. My drawings were in the building's preservation file. My name was on the engineering certificate above the east entrance. Margaret did not know this. We arrived at 7. Daniel in a dark navy suit, me in a green dress the color of old copper, the color, if I'm honest, I'd chosen 6 weeks earlier and told no one about. Meredith met us at the door. She hugged me tighter than usual. I could feel how nervous she was. The room was everything Margaret built it to be. Long tables draped in white linen, centerpieces of white flowers, gardenias and white roses, her signature. Candlelight, a string quartet in the corner, playing something I recognized but couldn't name. Every surface deliberate, every choice an argument for her taste. I walked through it slowly. 200 people in formal wear, the smell of magnolias and money, the particular sound of a room full of people who believe they are among their own kind. I was not afraid. I want to be clear about that. I was not afraid. Margaret found me at 7:40 near the drink station, while Daniel was across the room speaking with one of his father's former business partners. She was wearing a black gown with a single strand of pearls. She looked extraordinary. She always did. She took a glass of white wine from the server's tray. She did not take one for me. "Elena," she said, "you look well." "Thank you, Margaret. You've done a beautiful job with the room." She sipped her wine. Her eyes moved across the space the way a general surveys a field. "I wanted to speak with you before the program begins," she said. Her voice was low, pleasant, the voice she used when she wanted something to sound like a conversation instead of what it was. "Of course," I said. She looked at me then, directly. The reading glasses were gone. Her eyes were the same gray-green as Daniel's, and they were doing something I had not seen in 6 years. They were being entirely honest. "I've spent a long time," she said, "trying to understand what Daniel sees in you." She paused. "I don't mean that unkindly." "It lands unkindly," I said. A flicker of something crossed her face. She pressed on. "I had you looked into," she said. "Your family, your father specifically." My hands were still. My glass was still. I had known this was coming for 48 hours, and I had decided I would not give her the satisfaction of watching me flinch. "What did you find?" I asked. She set down her wine glass on a nearby table, very deliberately. "Your father was terminated from his position in 2004 for theft of materials from a public works facility. There was a police report. It was pled down to a misdemeanor, but the record exists." She kept her voice even, almost clinical. "I know you've kept this from Daniel. I know you've worked very hard to put distance between who you are and where you come from. And I understand that impulse, Elena. I do." She straightened. Her pearls caught the candlelight. "But my son deserves to know who he married." I have thought about this moment many times since that night, about what I felt standing there while she said those words. I want to describe it accurately because I think accuracy is the only kind of honesty that matters. I felt grief. Not shame, grief. The way you feel when something you suspected is confirmed and you realize part of you had still hoped you were wrong. My father had made a terrible decision when I was 11 years old. He had taken copper piping from a city maintenance yard, not a large amount, not for profit, Out of desperation because our heating system had failed in January, and he had no money to fix it, and 2 kids in the house and a wife working nights. He was reported by a supervisor. He pled guilty. He lost his job. He paid a fine. He told me when I was 16. He sat at our kitchen table and told me what he had done and why, and he cried and he said he was sorry, and I held his hand and said, "Dad, you kept us warm. That's what you did." He had been dead for 4 years, and Margaret Caldwell was using his worst moment as a weapon at a charity gala. I looked at her. I looked at her for a long time. Then I said, "Daniel knows." Her expression shifted, barely, a tightening around the eyes. "He's known since our second date," I said. "I told him before I told anyone else because I thought if we were going to be something real, it had to start with the truth." He sat with it for a night, and he called me the next morning and said it didn't change anything. "So whatever you were planning to do with that information tonight, Margaret, I need you to know, the only person in this room who didn't know was you." Silence. The string quartet switched to something slower. She reached for her wine glass. Her hand, I noticed, was not entirely steady. "The program begins at 8, she said, and she walked away. I found Daniel. I told him. All of it. What Margaret had researched, what she'd said, what she had planned to do. I watched his face as I spoke. He went through something in the space of 2 minutes. Surprise, then understanding, then a particular kind of sadness that had nothing to do with me. He said, "I'm going to talk to her." I said, "Not tonight. Tonight, just stand next to me." He took my hand. He did not let go of it for the next hour. The program began at 8. Margaret stepped to the podium. 200 people turned toward her. This was her element: the microphone, the room, the expectation in people's posture. She had been doing this for 9 years, and she was extraordinary at it. She thanked the sponsors. She described the foundation's programs. She quoted statistics. Children served, schools reached, literacy rates improved. It was a genuinely compelling presentation, and I watched it and felt the complicated truth of her. That someone can do real good in the world and still be cruel in private, and neither fact cancels the other. Then she paused. She looked up from her notes. "Before we welcome Mayor Tillman for this year's Civic Award," she said, "I'd like to say something personal." I felt Daniel's hand tighten around mine. She looked out at the room. Her eyes moved across the tables. She did not look at me. "This foundation has always been about community," she said, "about the idea that what we build together is more important than what any one of us builds alone. Tonight we're recognizing an individual, but I want us to remember, no one builds alone. What we are is always shaped by where we come from." She paused. "Where we come from," she repeated. She looked at me then, one direct, deliberate look, and then Mayor Tillman was at the podium, and Margaret stepped aside, and the moment passed. Mayor Tillman was a compact, energetic woman of 62, who had been reelected 3 times and who had no patience for long speeches. She said, "I'm going to keep this brief because the person I'm honoring tonight is not someone who enjoys being made a fuss of, and because everything I could say about her is already visible if you've ever stood inside one of her buildings." She described the Henderson Community Center Commission. She described my firm's decision to return 15% of the design fee to the city's Public Works Fund, $62,000, earmarked specifically for the city's most underserved communities. She described a letter she had received from the principal of an elementary school in North Charleston, whose students would use the new community center's after-school program, which said simply, "Tell whoever designed this building that my kids deserve something beautiful, and now they'll have it." Then she said, I also want to acknowledge something that most people in this room don't know. The building you're standing in tonight, the Hargrove Pavilion, was slated for demolition 4 years ago. A structural assessment had found issues the city didn't have the budget to address. An architect volunteered her firm's time to redesign the restoration plan. She did it for free. She did it because she said, and I'm reading from the project file, a city that lets its beautiful old buildings disappear has stopped believing in its own future. Her name is on the engineering certificate above the east entrance of this building. You walked past it tonight. Her name is Elena Marsh. The room applauded, not politely, actually applauded. I felt it move through me, not triumph, something quieter than that, something more like arrival. I squeezed Daniel's hand. He leaned close and said very quietly into my hair, I told you. Meredith found me during the cocktail hour after the program. She was crying, which she had been doing quietly since the mayor's speech. She held both my hands and said, I'm so sorry I didn't say something sooner. I'm so sorry it took me 6 years. I told her the same thing I'd told her on the phone 2 nights before. You did the right thing when it mattered. She wiped her eyes. She said, What happens now with Mom? I said, That's up to her. I need to tell you about the other thing. The thing I had filed in March and set down and not thought about for 6 months because I had a building to finish. At 9:17 that evening, my phone vibrated. A message from Priya Anand. Turn on your notifications. South Carolina SOS just posted the investigation report. Public record as of tonight. I excused myself to the ladies' room. I sat in a stall in my green dress, and I read the summary on my phone. The Secretary of State's office had completed a 4-month investigation into Meridian Strategic Partners, LLC. They had traced the ownership through 2 holding companies to a single individual, a name I didn't recognize. The report cited substantial evidence of grant fund diversion from the Caldwell Foundation, $240,000 over 4 years, routed through false consulting contracts to a private account. The individual named was not Margaret. It was the board chair, the personal friend who had buried Priya's initial report. The man who had been managing Margaret's finances since her husband died, who had built himself into the infrastructure of her trust so completely that he had used it to steal from the children her foundation was supposed to serve. I sat in that bathroom stall for a long time. What I felt was not satisfaction. It was something more complicated. The particular sadness of a story turning out to be different from the one you expected. Margaret had not stolen the money. She hadn't known. Everything she had built, the galas, the programs, the reputation, she had built in good faith, while someone she trusted was hollowing it out from the inside. And I had been the one, without knowing, who had stopped it. I came back to the table. Daniel was talking to a city councilman. Meredith was refilling her wine. I found my seat and sat down. Across the room, I could see Margaret at the foundation's donor table. She was speaking with someone, smiling her public smile. In her hand was a phone. As I watched, she looked down at it. Her expression shifted. She had seen the news. I watched her read it. I watched the moment she understood what it meant, that the person she had trusted with her dead husband's legacy had been stealing from it, that the foundation's reputation, which was her reputation, which was her entire identity, had a wound in it she hadn't known was there. She sat down very slowly. For about 30 seconds, she was entirely still in the middle of a loud and moving room, like a building whose load-bearing wall has just been quietly, invisibly removed. Then she stood. She said something to the person beside her. She walked toward the exit. She passed my table. She stopped. She looked at me for a long moment, 200 people in the room, none of them watching this. She said, "Did you know about William?" The board chair. "Did you know when you filed the report?" I said, "No, I filed it because of the children, not because of you." She was quiet. Then she said, in a voice I had never heard from her, a voice with no performance in it at all, "Why would you protect an institution that was never kind to you?" I looked at her. I thought about the answer for a moment. Because the work was real, I said. Whatever was happening underneath it, the work was real. The kids in those programs are real. That deserved protecting. She held my gaze. Her pearls were still perfect. Her posture was still perfect. But something behind her eyes was not the same as it had been 6 years ago in her driveway. She said nothing else. She walked out. The drive home was quiet. Lily, our daughter, 18 months old, asleep at home with the babysitter, had sent us a photo via the sitter's phone at some point in the evening. She was holding her stuffed rabbit and grinning with the 3 teeth she had. Daniel set the photo as his lock screen while I drove. He said, "What do you want to happen with my mother?" I said, "That's not really the question." He said, "What's the question?" I thought about it. The question is whether she'll understand the difference between who she thought I was and who I actually am. And if she does, if she genuinely wants that, then maybe we can start something different. He was quiet for a long stretch of highway. He said, "And if she doesn't?" I said, "Then we keep our distance. Lily will know her grandmother, but on terms that I set. And the first term is that she speaks to me and about me the way she would speak to anyone she respects." Daniel nodded. Simple, clean, final. "Yeah," he said. "That's right." Margaret called 3 days later. Not to apologize, not exactly. She said she wanted to meet. I said yes, but at my office, not her house. She came on a Wednesday afternoon. She sat in the chair across from my desk. She looked at the drawings on my wall. She looked at them for a long time. She said, "These are the Henderson Community Center drawings?" "Yes," I said. She studied them. I watched her look, really look, at what I had built on paper. She said, "I owe you an apology, more than one." I waited. She said, "I decided who you were before I knew you. I used everything I could find to confirm what I'd already decided." She folded her hands in her lap. "That's not something I can defend. I've been sitting with it for 3 days, and I can't find a defense for it." I said, "I know." She said, "I don't know how to fix 6 years." I said, "You don't fix it. You just do the next thing differently." She looked at me. For the first time in 6 years, when she looked at me, I felt seen. Not sized up, not filed, seen. She said, "The Hargrove Pavilion. You never told me." "No," I said. She shook her head slowly, almost to herself. "The building I've been standing in for 11 years. I said, "Good bones." The bones were always good. They just needed someone to see them. I don't know if she understood I wasn't only talking about the building. I think maybe she did. My daughter is 2 years old now. She has Daniel's gray-green eyes. She has my stubborn chin. She has the habit already of picking up objects and studying them from every angle before putting them down, as if she's deciding whether they're worth keeping. I think she gets that from me. The Henderson Community Center opens in 4 months. There will be a ribbon cutting. Mayor Tillman will be there. My name will be on the cornerstone. My father's name, James Howard Park, maintenance engineer, will be on a beam inside the building in the structural core where it will not be visible to anyone except the people who build the walls around it. It is there because he kept us warm, and because the most important structures are the ones you never see. I want to say one last thing before I go. My mother-in-law spent 6 years deciding that I wasn't enough. She used everything she could find, my father's worst moment, my family's poverty, the quiet arithmetic of who had money and who didn't. To build a case against me age. Invited 200 people, handed the microphone to someone else, and that someone else said my name the way it deserved to be said. I didn't plan it that way. I couldn't have. The truth doesn't operate on a schedule. It just accumulates quietly in the background, in board filings and engineering certificates, and the testimony of children whose lives were actually changed, until the night when someone finally reads the room correctly and realizes that the building has been supporting its own weight all along. You don't have to perform for people who won't look at you. You just have to build something real. When it's ready, it will speak for itself. That's all I've got. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been in a room where someone had already decided you didn't belong, share it with someone who needs to hear it. There's another story waiting for you in the description. I'll see you there.